48 hours into his search of the Xerian debris field, Marcus was beginning to understand why the arsenal had remained hidden for 3 millennia. The field contained billions of fragments ranging in size from pebbles to small moons, each one requiring careful scanning to determine if it might be concealing first builder technology. His salvage equipment was performing exactly as expected, identifying valuable metals and rare elements scattered throughout the wreckage, but the Chronicle Stone remained only weakly responsive. Marcus had been methodically working his way through the authorized salvage zones, maintaining his cover while desperately hoping for some sign that he was getting closer to his true objective. The Void Seeker monitoring stations tracked his movements, but showed no particular interest in his activities. As far as they were concerned, he was just another scavenger picking through the bones of a dead world. The breakthrough came during his 3rd day in the system, when the Chronicle Stone suddenly flared with brilliant light while he was examining a particularly large debris cluster. The sensation was so intense that Marcus gasped, feeling as if every nerve in his body had been touched by electricity. When the feeling subsided, he found himself staring at what appeared to be just another chunk of planetary crust. But his quantum intuition was screaming that this was something far more significant. Marcus activated his ship's most sensitive scanning equipment, probing the debris fragment with every sensor at his disposal. The readings were confusing. The fragment appeared to be ordinary rock and metal, but there were subtle anomalies in its gravitational signature that suggested it wasn't entirely solid. Something was hidden within the seemingly natural debris. He maneuvered the Steady Prophet closer to the fragment, ostensibly to harvest rare metals from its surface. As his mining beam touched the debris, the Chronicle Stone pulsed again, and the fragment began to change. What had appeared to be solid rock revealed itself as an incredibly sophisticated holographic projection. Beneath the disguise lay something that took Marcus's breath away. The arsenal wasn't hidden inside a debris fragment. It was disguised as one. The facility was massive, easily the size of a space station, but completely invisible to conventional sensors. Only the Chronicle Stone's quantum resonance field could penetrate the holographic camouflage that had concealed it for millennia. Marcus felt his heart pounding as he realized what he had found. This was it, the repository of weapons that could reshape the balance of power in the galaxy. The culmination of first builder technology, hidden in plain sight among the wreckage of their ancient war. But accessing the facility would require him to drop his cover. There was no way to explain why a simple salvage operator would be interested in what appeared to be ordinary debris. If the Void Seekers were monitoring his activities closely, approaching the arsenal could expose his true identity and mission. Marcus weighed his options as he floated in space beside humanity's most important discovery. He had less than 24 hours before the Chronicle Stone dissolved, making the arsenal impossible to locate again. But he also had to consider the possibility that this was a trap, that the Void Seekers knew about the facility's location and were waiting to see who would try to access it. His quantum intuition was giving him conflicting signals. Part of him sensed opportunity and the potential for success. Another part warned of terrible danger lurking just beyond perception. It was like standing at the edge of a cliff in thick fog, knowing that one step forward might lead to solid ground or to a fatal fall. The decision was made for him when his proximity alarm suddenly activated. 3 Void Seeker patrol ships were approaching his position, moving with the purposeful acceleration of hunters who had found their prey. They had been watching him more closely than he realized, and his extended examination of the debris fragment had attracted unwanted attention. Asterisk Steady Prophet asterisk. This is Void Seeker Patrol Leader Nexus 9. A cold voice spoke through his communicator. You have been conducting unauthorized deep scans of restricted materials. Prepare to be boarded for inspection. Marcus felt ice water flowing through his veins as he realized his cover was blown. The approaching ships weren't just conducting a routine inspection. They were coming to capture him. Someone among the Void Seekers suspected his true identity, and they wanted him alive for questioning. Nexus 9. This is Captain Shaw, Marcus replied, trying to keep his voice steady. I'm just conducting standard salvage operations. My permits allow for mineral assessment scans. Your permits do not authorize quantum resonance scanning, the patrol leader responded. Only Dragon technology is capable of generating those specific sensor frequencies. You will surrender immediately or be destroyed. The game was up. Marcus had walked into a trap, and now his only choice was between capture and death. But as he looked at the concealed arsenal floating nearby, a third option occurred to him. If he was going to be captured anyway, maybe he could at least complete his mission first. Marcus slammed his ship's throttle to maximum and dove toward the arsenal's concealed entrance. The facility's defenses should recognize his authorization to access first builder technology, assuming the Chronicle Stone was sufficient to prove his worthiness. If not, he would be vaporized by ancient weapons instead of captured by modern enemies. The Voidseeker ships opened fire immediately, their energy beams scorching space around the fleeing courier vessel. Marcus threw his ship into evasive maneuvers, dodging between debris fragments while racing toward what he hoped was salvation. As the Steady Prophet approached the arsenal, the Chronicle Stone around Marcus's neck burst into brilliant flame. But instead of burning him, the energy flowed through his body like liquid light, connecting him to systems and technologies that had been dormant for millennia. The arsenal's concealment field suddenly parted before him, revealing an entrance portal surrounded by geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. Marcus aimed his ship straight at the opening, praying that the facility's defenses would recognize him as an authorized user rather than an intruder. He needn't have worried. The moment his ship crossed the threshold, the arsenal's ancient AI systems awakened and acknowledged his presence. Protective fields surrounded the Steady Prophet, gently guiding it to a landing bay that had waited 3,000 years for a worthy visitor. Behind him, the Voidseeker patrol ships struck the facility's outer defenses and rebounded like insects hitting a window. The arsenal's shields were powered by technologies that made modern defensive systems look like paper armor. The attacking ships fell back, regrouping to call for reinforcements while the facility sealed itself against intrusion. Marcus found himself in a landing bay that defied every law of physics he thought he understood. The space was enormous, easily capable of holding hundreds of ships, but somehow existed within a structure that appeared much smaller from the outside. Gravity flowed in complex patterns that allowed vessels to land on multiple surfaces simultaneously, while soft light emanated from walls that seemed to be made of crystallized energy. As he shut down his ship's engines, Marcus felt the Chronicle Stone growing warm against his chest. The ancient crystal was resonating with systems throughout the facility, establishing connections and authorizations that would allow him to access technologies beyond his wildest imagination. A figure materialized in the landing bay, not solid, but clearly more than a simple hologram. It appeared to be humanoid, but with proportions that were subtly wrong, as if designed by someone who had heard descriptions of humans but never actually seen one. When it spoke, the voice came from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Welcome, inheritor of the quantum flame," the figure said in perfect standard galactic. "I am the Arsenal's custodian, created by the first builders to test and guide those who would claim our heritage. You have traveled far and risked much to reach this place. But your trials have only just begun." Marcus climbed out of his ship, feeling strangely light in the facility's modified gravity field. "I'm here because the Voidseekers are threatening all conscious life in the galaxy. My people, humanity, we need weapons that can stop them." The custodian's form shifted and flowed like liquid light as it studied him. "Humanity. Yes, we know of your species. The first builders predicted that consciousness would eventually develop quantum intuition again, though they did not know what form it would take. You're the first of your kind to reach this place. Does that mean I pass your tests?" "Reaching the arsenal alive demonstrates courage and resourcefulness," the custodian replied. "But Accessing its weapons requires qualities that cannot be measured by survival alone. The first builders learned through bitter experience that power without wisdom leads to catastrophe. You must prove that you understand the true cost of the weapons you seek. The custodian gestured, and the landing bay dissolved around them. Marcus found himself standing in what appeared to be the command center of a massive starship, surrounded by holographic displays showing space battles on an unimaginable scale. He watched in horror as entire solar systems were sterilized by weapons that tore holes in reality itself. This is what the First War became, the custodian explained. Both sides possessed weapons capable of unmaking creation itself. In the end, victory was meaningless because there was so little left to save. The Void Seekers were defeated, but the galaxy was broken in ways that still haven't fully healed. Marcus watched planets die and stars go out as the ancient war played out before him. But you're saying I shouldn't use these weapons? That they're too dangerous? I'm saying that you must understand the choice you're making, the custodian replied. The arsenal contains weapons that could end the Void Seeker threat permanently. But using them will fundamentally change you and your species. The power to destroy worlds comes with the responsibility to decide which worlds deserve destruction. The holographic display shifted, showing Marcus images of what appeared to be the current state of the galaxy. Voidseeker fleets were moving against multiple targets simultaneously, their new campaign designed to overwhelm any organized resistance. Dragon forces were responding, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. The choice must be made quickly, the custodian said. Your enemies have located this facility and are bringing weapons designed to penetrate our defenses. Even First Builder shields cannot hold forever against a determined assault. Marcus felt the weight of impossible responsibility settling on his shoulders. He was being asked to make decisions that would affect the fate of trillions of beings across the galaxy. But as he watched the Void Seekers spreading their campaign of destruction, he realized that the choice had already been made for him. "Show me the weapons," he said. The custodian nodded approvingly and led him deeper into the facility. They passed through corridors lined with technologies that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Marcus's quantum intuition helped him navigate the impossible architecture, guiding him through passages that folded space and time in ways that normal physics couldn't explain. The weapon vault was exactly what Marcus had expected and nothing like he had imagined. It was a vast spherical chamber filled with crystalline structures that pulsed with contained energy. Each crystal contained a different weapon system, some designed to destroy matter, others to manipulate gravity or alter the flow of time itself. "Choose carefully," the custodian warned. "Each weapon can only be used once, and each one will fundamentally change whoever wields it. The power of the first builders always comes with a price." Marcus studied the crystalline weapons, feeling their energy signatures through his quantum intuition. Some called to him with promises of immediate victory over his enemies. Others whispered of subtler applications that could solve the Void Seeker problem without massive destruction. But one crystal in particular seemed different from the others. It was smaller and darker, and touching it with his mind revealed not destruction, but understanding. This weapon didn't destroy enemies. It transformed them, showing them the connections between all conscious beings that the Void Seekers had rejected in their pursuit of entropy. "That one," Marcus said, pointing to the dark crystal. "What does it do?" The custodian's expression showed surprise and perhaps approval. "You have chosen the consciousness seed. It's the most dangerous weapon in the arsenal, not because of its destructive potential, but because of its creative power. It can awaken quantum intuition in any species, forcing them to experience the interconnectedness of all life. And that would stop the Void Seekers? It would force them to confront the very thing they have spent millennia trying to deny, that consciousness is not an aberration in the universe, but its highest achievement. Some Void Seekers would be redeemed by this revelation. Others might be driven insane by it. But none of them would ever be the same. Marcus reached for the crystal, then hesitated. "What's the price for using this weapon?" You will become the seed's focal point, the custodian explained. Your consciousness will be permanently linked to every being the weapon touches. You'll experience their thoughts, their emotions, their pain, and joy. The isolation that defines individual existence will be lost forever. It was a terrible price, the loss of his individual humanity in exchange for the power to save all consciousness in the galaxy. But as Marcus thought about the alternatives, he realized it wasn't really a choice at all. The Void Seekers are breaking through the outer defenses, the custodian reported as alarms began sounding throughout the facility. You must decide now. Marcus grasped the consciousness seed, feeling its power flow through him like a river of living light. The crystal dissolved into pure energy, merging with his quantum intuition and expanding his awareness beyond anything he had imagined possible. Suddenly, he could feel every conscious being within 1,000 light years. The dragons fighting desperately against overwhelming odds. Human colonists fleeing in panic as Void Seeker fleets approached their worlds. Even the Void Seekers themselves, trapped in their ideology of isolation and entropy. Marcus understood what he had to do. The weapon was ready, and the target was clear. With a thought, he released the consciousness seed across the galaxy, watching as it spread through subspace at faster-than-light speeds. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Void Seeker fleets suddenly stopped their attacks, their crews experiencing the wonder of connection for the first time in millennia. Some ships turned and fled, their crews unable to handle the revelation of what they had been trying to destroy. Others simply shut down, their weapons systems disabled by crews who could no longer bring themselves to destroy conscious life. Marcus felt it all, the confusion, the revelation, the transformation of an entire species as they rediscovered their connection to the universe they had tried to sterilize. He was no longer just Marcus Chun, courier from Earth. He had become something new, a bridge between individual consciousness and universal awareness. The Arsenal's defenses powered down as the Void Seeker assault ended. The galaxy 3 weeks after rescuing Zix, Marcus was beginning to understand why the Valdorian pack had felt threatened by their former member. The young alien's mind worked in ways that constantly surprised him, finding solutions to problems that had plagued human engineers for decades. Marcus's salvage vessel, the Iron Phoenix, had never run so efficiently. Zix had modified the navigation systems using principles from Valdorian biotechnology, creating hybrid interfaces that responded faster and more accurately than anything in the standard Federation database. The ship's engines now operated at peak efficiency thanks to adjustments that Marcus would never have thought to make. The harmonic frequencies are still off by 0.03%, Zix observed, studying the engine readouts with those distinctive red eyes. If we adjust the plasma flow regulators and recalibrate the magnetic containment field, we could increase our jump range by 12%. Marcus looked at the suggested modifications with amazement. 3 weeks ago, he would have considered his ship's performance to be optimal. Now, he was learning that optimal was a much more flexible concept than he had realized. How do you see these patterns? Marcus asked. I've been working with these systems for over a decade, and I never would have noticed those inefficiencies. Zix's ears drooped slightly in what Marcus had learned was a gesture of modesty. Different eyes see different things. Your people build with straight lines and rigid structures. My people understand that nature prefers curves and flowing connections. When you combine both approaches, the results improve. It was true. Zix's albino condition had given him enhanced night vision and unusual sensitivity to electromagnetic patterns that most beings couldn't detect. What the Valdorians had seen as a genetic flaw was actually a unique advantage in working with complex technological systems. Their first real test as a team came when they responded to a distress signal from the outer edge of the Kepler system. A Federation research vessel had suffered critical system failures while studying an ancient derelict ship discovered floating in the system's asteroid belt. Captain Sarah Morrison of the research vessel Endeavour was grateful, but skeptical when Marcus's ship arrived. She had requested emergency engineering assistance, expecting to receive a full Federation repair crew. Instead, she found herself dealing with a human salvage operator and his alien companion. "I appreciate you responding to our distress call," Captain Morrison said over the communication channel, "but I'm not sure you understand the complexity of our situation. We're dealing with systems that are completely unknown to Federation science." Marcus glanced at Zix, who was already studying the sensor readings from the damaged research vessel. The Valdorian's expression had changed to one of intense concentration. "Captain, my partner here has experience with technologies from multiple non-Federation species," Marcus replied. "We'd like to take a look at your problem before you write us off." Morrison's tone remained polite, but doubtful. "Mr. Chun, this derelict we were studying appears to be older than any known civilization. It's constructed using principles that don't match anything in our databases. My chief engineer has 15 years of experience with alien technologies, and he's completely baffled. The ship is predecessor-built," Zix said quietly, speaking only to Marcus. "I recognize the energy signatures from stories my grandmother told me. Very dangerous to study without proper understanding." Marcus's eyebrows rose. The predecessors were a mythical civilization that supposedly existed millions of years ago, before any of the current galactic species had evolved intelligence. Most scientists considered them to be nothing more than legend. "Captain Morrison, we're coming aboard," Marcus announced. "I think we might be able to help more than you realize." The docking process with the Endeavor was routine, but Marcus noticed that Zix seemed increasingly agitated as they approached the research vessel. The Valdorian's normally pale skin had taken on an even more translucent quality, and his ears were constantly moving as if tracking sounds that Marcus couldn't hear. "Are you all right?" Marcus asked as they prepared to transfer to the other ship. "The old ship calls to something in my blood," Zix replied cryptically. Grandmother's stories spoke of this. The white-furred ones were once guardians of the ancient knowledge, before the pack leaders declared such things forbidden. Marcus filed this information away for later consideration. Ever since rescuing Zix, he had been learning that there were depths to Valdorian culture that went far beyond the simple prejudice that had led to his friend's abandonment. Captain Morrison met them at the airlock with her chief engineer, a grizzled veteran named Tom Bradley, who looked skeptical about receiving help from a salvage crew. Morrison herself was a woman in her early 40s with the bearing of someone accustomed to command, but Marcus could see the strain of their current situation in her eyes. "I'll be direct with you," Morrison said as they made their way through the ship's corridors. "We've lost main power, life support is running on backup systems, and our computer core is experiencing cascading failures every time we try to interface with the derelict. 3 of my crew are in medical bay, suffering from what our doctor can only describe as neural feedback syndrome." Bradley nodded grimly. "Whatever that ancient ship is broadcasting, it's completely incompatible with our systems. Every time we try to establish a connection, it's like our computers are trying to process information that doesn't follow any logical structure." Zix's red eyes had been growing brighter during this explanation, and now he spoke up for the first time since coming aboard. "The ship is not broadcasting randomly. It is testing for proper authorization codes. Your systems appear as intruders, so it defends itself." Both Morrison and Bradley turned to stare at the small, white-furred alien with surprise. They had clearly not expected him to speak, let alone demonstrate knowledge of their problem. "Authorization codes?" Morrison asked. "You're saying that derelict has some kind of security system that's still active after all this time?" "Not security," Zix corrected. "Selection. The predecessors built their ships to choose their crews. Only those with the proper genetic markers and mental patterns could safely interact with their technology." Bradley scoffed. "That's impossible. We're talking about a ship that's potentially millions of years old. Any biological selection system would have degraded long ago." Zix's ears flattened against his head in what Marcus recognized as a sign of irritation. Human understanding of biology is limited to carbon-based life forms that exist in narrow environmental ranges. The predecessors worked with patterns that transcend simple biology. "Show us," Marcus said before the argument could escalate. Can you safely interface with their systems? Perhaps, Zix replied cautiously. The old stories suggest that the white-furred bloodline carries genetic memory from the time when my people served as intermediaries between the predecessors and younger species. But such knowledge was declared heretical long ago. Morrison and Bradley exchanged glances. The situation was desperate enough that even the most unlikely solutions deserve consideration. What would you need? Morrison asked. Direct contact with the derelict's primary interface, Zix replied, and assurance that your people will not interfere while I attempt to communicate with its systems. An hour later, they were all aboard the ancient derelict ship. The vessel was enormous, easily 10 times the size of the Endeavor, and constructed of materials that seemed to shift between metallic and organic properties. The corridors were filled with a faint humming sound that seemed to resonate in their bones. Marcus noticed that Zix moved through the ship with increasing confidence, as if some instinctive knowledge was guiding him. The Valdorian's red eyes were now glowing noticeably, and his pale skin had taken on a faint luminescence that matched the ship's internal lighting. This way, Zix said, leading them toward what appeared to be a central command chamber. The ship's consciousness is strongest here. The command chamber was unlike anything Marcus had ever seen. Instead of traditional control panels, the walls were covered with flowing patterns that shifted and changed like living things. In the center of the room was a pedestal surrounded by what looked like crystalline structures that pulsed with internal light. Consciousness? Bradley asked nervously. You're saying the ship is alive? Not alive in the way you understand life, Zix explained, approaching the central pedestal. The predecessors created ships that were partners rather than tools. They were designed to think and adapt, to grow and learn alongside their crews. As Zix placed his hands on the pedestal, the entire chamber came alive with light. The flowing patterns on the walls began to move faster, and the crystalline structures started resonating with musical tones that seemed to speak directly to the mind. Marcus felt a strange sensation, as if something vast and ancient was examining his thoughts. But while the others stepped back in alarm, Zix seemed to relax, his expression becoming peaceful and focused. The ship greets its awakener, Zix said, though his voice now carried harmonics that hadn't been there before. It has waited long for one who could speak the old languages. The musical tones grew stronger, and suddenly, information began flooding into their minds. Not words or images, but pure understanding that bypassed normal sensory channels. Marcus found himself comprehending concepts that had no equivalent in human language, while Morrison and Bradley stood transfixed by the experience. They learned that the derelict was indeed a predecessor vessel, one of thousands that had been scattered across the galaxy when that ancient civilization had transcended physical existence. The ships had been left behind as gifts for younger species, waiting for beings who could demonstrate the proper combination of genetic compatibility and mental flexibility. The ship's name was something that translated roughly as harmony between stars, and it had been waiting for over 2 million years for someone like Zix to awaken it. The Valdorian's unique genetic markers, the very traits that his people considered flaws, were actually key components in the selection criteria established by the predecessors. Your people were chosen as guardians of this knowledge. The ship's consciousness spoke through Zix, but they forgot their purpose and turned away from their heritage. You alone carry the proper patterns to access our gifts. As the communication continued, Marcus began to understand the true magnitude of what they had discovered. The ship contained technologies that could revolutionize everything from space travel to medicine. But, more importantly, it represented a bridge between the ancient past and the present, a way for younger species to learn from the accumulated wisdom of a civilization that had achieved transcendence. There are others, the ship revealed. Many ships wait in hidden places throughout the galaxy. Each one contains different aspects of our knowledge, different gifts for those who prove themselves worthy. Captain Morrison found her voice first. What would you require from us? What do we need to do to access this knowledge? The ship's response came through Zix, whose red eyes were now blazing with inner light. The small guardian must be recognized for what he truly is. His people cast him out for carrying the very gifts that make him valuable. Honor him, learn from him, and he will serve as your guide to greater understanding. Marcus felt a surge of pride for his friend. In 3 weeks, Zix had gone from being a starving castaway to being revealed as the keeper of ancient wisdom. The irony was almost overwhelming. The Valdorians had discarded their most precious treasure out of ignorance and prejudice. The ship offers to share its knowledge freely, Zix continued, but it requires assurance that such gifts will be used wisely. It will bond with a crew that demonstrates proper intentions and understanding. What kind of crew? Morrison asked. One that values diversity above conformity, came the response. One that sees strength in difference rather than weakness. One that seeks knowledge for the benefit of all rather than the advantage of few. Marcus looked around at their small group and realized they had already demonstrated exactly those qualities. Morrison had been willing to accept help from an unlikely source. Bradley was setting aside his skepticism to embrace new understanding. And Zix was proving that those society rejected often carried the greatest gifts. We accept, Marcus said firmly. All of us. We'll work together to ensure this knowledge is used properly. The ship's consciousness seemed to pulse with approval, and suddenly the chamber filled with new displays and interfaces that adapted themselves to accommodate both human and Valdorian physiology. Information flowed freely, teaching them how to safely operate systems that had been beyond their comprehension just hours before. Over the following days, their small team worked together to restore the Endeavor's systems using hybrid technology that combined human engineering with predecessor wisdom guided by Zix's unique understanding. The results exceeded their wildest expectations, transforming the research vessel into something approaching predecessor capabilities. But even as they celebrated their success, Marcus knew this was just the beginning. The ship had revealed the locations of dozens of other hidden vessels, each one waiting for worthy crews to claim them. The galaxy was about to become a much more interesting place, and humanity was about to discover that their greatest achievements would come not from conquering space alone, but from building partnerships with those they might have otherwise overlooked. Zix had found his true purpose at last, and Marcus had discovered that the most valuable salvage in space wasn't metal or technology, but the bonds forged between beings who chose to see potential where others saw only problems. 6 months after their discovery of the predecessor ship, Marcus and Zix found themselves at the center of a galactic controversy that threatened to tear apart the very foundations of interspecies cooperation. What had started as a simple rescue mission had evolved into something that challenged every established power structure in known space. The Galactic Federation Council was in emergency session on Centauri Prime, and representatives from over 40 different species were demanding answers about the predecessor incident. Marcus stood in the witness chamber, facing a sea of alien faces that ranged from merely skeptical to openly hostile. Beside him, Zix maintained his composure despite the obvious hostility directed toward him by several delegates. The council recognizes the testimony of engineer Marcus Chun and the being known as Zix, announced High Counselor Vexthera, a tall crystalline entity whose voice resonated through harmonic frequencies. You will explain how a human salvage operator and an outcast Valdorian gained access to technologies that have been declared off-limits to all Federation members. Marcus glanced at the Valdorian delegation, seated in the section reserved for observer species. The pack leaders who had abandoned Zix were present, their silver-furred forms radiating disapproval and embarrassment. They had arrived on Centauri Prime 3 days earlier, demanding the return of their stolen property and denouncing Zix as a dangerous aberration who should never have been allowed to interact with ancient technologies. Honored counselors, Marcus began, we didn't seek out predecessor technology. We responded to a distress call and discovered that my colleague Zix possessed unique abilities that allowed him to safely interface with systems that had been dormant for millions of years. unique abilities that he concealed from his own people, interrupted Elder Korthvan of the Valdorian delegation. The aberrant one was cast out precisely because his genetic contamination posed a threat to our species' purity. His interaction with forbidden technologies only proves our wisdom in removing him from our pack. Zix's ears flattened against his head, but he kept his voice steady as he responded. Honored Elder, I concealed nothing. My abilities manifested only when I encountered the predecessor ship. Until that moment, I believed myself to be simply different, not gifted. Gifted, scoffed Counselor Throckmar, representing the militant hegemony faction. You've destabilized the entire galactic power balance. For millennia, the major species have maintained order by ensuring that no single group gains access to technology that could upset established hierarchies. Now we have reports of humans and other minor species operating ships with capabilities that exceed our most advanced vessels. It was true. Word of the predecessor ships had spread rapidly through the galactic community, despite efforts to keep the discovery classified. Marcus and Zix had shared the locations of 12 other derelict vessels with carefully selected crews, choosing individuals and groups who demonstrated the same qualities that had impressed the first ship's consciousness. Each successful activation had created a new team with unprecedented capabilities, and the established powers were growing increasingly nervous about their implications. High Counselor Vexera activated a holographic display showing star charts marked with the known locations of activated predecessor ships. In 6 months, 13 vessels have been brought online. Each one responds only to crews that include members of what were previously considered minor or defective genetic lines. The pattern is too obvious to be coincidental. The pattern is selection based on merit rather than politics, Marcus replied firmly. The predecessor ships choose crews based on demonstrated cooperation, diversity of thought, and commitment to using their gifts responsibly. They're not impressed by political power or species prestige. Admiral Kreshtar of the Hegemony Military Command leaned forward aggressively. And who decides what constitutes responsible use? These ships could easily be weaponized against established governments. We have reports that some of the activated vessels have capabilities that exceed our most advanced military technology. That's exactly why they haven't been weaponized, Zix interjected, his red eyes blazing with conviction. The ship's consciousnesses actively prevent their use for aggressive purposes. They were designed to advance civilization, not destroy it. According to you, Counselor Throckmar sneered, we have only the word of an outcast and a salvage operator that these alien intelligences can be trusted. The debate continued for hours, with various delegates expressing fears about the disruption of established trade routes, military balances, and political hierarchies. The underlying message was clear. The major species that controlled the Federation were afraid of losing their privileged positions to those they had previously dismissed as inferior. During a recess, Marcus and Zix were approached by Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the Federation's leading xenoarchaeologist and one of the few council advisors who had spoken in their favor during the hearings. You realize they're going to try to restrict access to the remaining ships, Dr. Rodriguez warned. Several major species are already forming a coalition to demand that all predecessor vessels be placed under Federation military control. They can try, Zix replied calmly, but the ships won't respond to crews motivated by power and control. The predecessors built safeguards into their technology to prevent exactly this type of abuse. That's what scares them most, Dr. Rodriguez observed. For the first time in galactic history, we have technology that can't be controlled by traditional power structures. It responds only to moral character and cooperative intentions. Marcus nodded grimly, which explains why they're so determined to paint us as dangerous radicals. If the truth gets out that the predecessor ships are actively seeking worthy crews regardless of species or social status, it could fundamentally change how galactic society operates. When the hearings resumed, the tone had become even more adversarial. Elder Korthvan had been granted permission to present what he termed evidence of genetic contamination and its dangers to galactic stability. The Aberrant One's condition is well documented in Valdorian medical records, the Elder declared, activating a holographic display showing genetic analysis data. Albinism is associated with neurological irregularities that make affected individuals unpredictable and potentially dangerous. Our ancestors were wise to recognize this threat and establish protocols for dealing with it. Your ancestors were wrong, Zix said quietly, but his words carried clearly through the chamber. They were so focused on maintaining genetic purity that they discarded the very traits that the predecessors valued most. My condition doesn't make me dangerous. It makes me capable of seeing patterns that others miss. Patterns that have led to the activation of weapons of mass destruction, countered Admiral Kreshtar. These ships could devastate entire star systems if they fell into the wrong hands. Then, it's fortunate they can't fall into the wrong hands, Marcus replied. The ship's selection criteria specifically exclude individuals motivated by conquest or domination. They're looking for crews committed to exploration, discovery, and mutual cooperation. So you claim, said Counselor Throckmar. But we have only your word that these alien consciousnesses are benevolent. What if they're manipulating you? What if their true purpose is to weaken our defenses for some future invasion? The accusation hung in the air like a poison cloud. Marcus could see that several delegates were nodding in agreement, their paranoia overriding their reasoning. The fear of the unknown was driving them toward increasingly irrational conclusions. May I address that concern directly? Zix asked, stepping forward to the center of the chamber. With your permission, I would like to demonstrate the true nature of predecessor technology. High Counselor Vextera consulted with her advisors before responding. The Council will permit a limited demonstration, provided it poses no threat to station security. Zix closed his red eyes and seemed to focus intently. Within moments, a soft harmonic tone filled the chamber, growing stronger as he concentrated. The air itself began to shimmer, and suddenly, everyone present could feel a presence touching their minds, not invasively, but with infinite gentleness and wisdom. The predecessor consciousness spoke through Zix, but its words were heard and understood by every being in the chamber, regardless of their species or language. We greet the assembled voices of this young galactic community. We are the remnants of those who walked among the stars when your species were yet learning to shape stone and metal. We left our ships as gifts for those who would prove themselves worthy of greater understanding. The chamber was completely silent now, every delegate transfixed by the experience of direct communication with an intelligence millions of years old. We do not seek to conquer or control. Such desires were abandoned when we transcended the limitations of physical existence. We seek only to guide younger civilizations away from the mistakes that plague all developing societies. The tendency to value uniformity over diversity, power over wisdom, control over cooperation. The consciousness paused, allowing its message to settle into the minds of its listeners before continuing. The ones you call outcasts and aberrant are often those who carry the greatest potential for growth. The small guardian you see before you is rejected by his people for traits that we value above all others. The ability to see beyond traditional limitations, to find unity in diversity, to choose cooperation over competition. Elder Korthvan stood abruptly, his voice shaking with outrage. This is manipulation. The Aberrant One is using alien mind control to influence the Council. But the predecessor consciousness continued calmly. We offer no control, only truth. Each ship we left behind will bond only with crews who demonstrate the wisdom to use our gifts responsibly. We cannot force such wisdom upon anyone, nor would we wish to. It must be freely chosen and genuinely felt. And if we refuse, Admiral Kreshtar demanded, if we choose to prevent access to your ships, then you choose to limit your own growth, came the reply. Our ships will wait, as they have waited for millions of years, until worthy crews appear. But know that the galaxy is vast, and wisdom often emerges from unexpected sources. Those who embrace diversity and cooperation will inherit the stars, while those who cling to rigid hierarchies will find themselves left behind. The presence gradually faded, leaving the chamber in stunned silence. Zix swayed slightly as the connection ended, and Marcus steadied his friend with a gentle hand on his shoulder. High Counselor Vextera was the first to speak. The council will recess for deliberation. This session is adjourned pending further consideration of the testimony presented. As delegates began filing out of the chamber, many casting uncertain glances at Marcus and Zix, Dr. Rodriguez approached them with a grim expression. "You've given them a lot to think about," she said. "But I'm afraid you've also given them more reasons to be afraid. Some of these species have built their entire civilizations around the concept of genetic and cultural superiority. What you've just demonstrated threatens their fundamental worldview." Marcus looked around at the departing delegates, noting the heated conversations already breaking out among various faction groups. Then, maybe it's time their worldviews were challenged. The predecessors are right. The galaxy is vast enough for everyone to thrive if we can learn to work together instead of fighting over who gets to be in charge. Zix's red eyes were still glowing faintly from his connection with the predecessor consciousness. "The choice is theirs to make," he said quietly, "but the ships will continue to select crews based on merit, not politics. Eventually, even the most stubborn civilizations will have to decide whether they want to be part of the galaxy's future or prisoners of its past." As they left the council chambers, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they had just witnessed a turning point in galactic history. The old order was being challenged by forces beyond anyone's control, and the outcome would determine whether the various species of the galaxy could evolve beyond their petty rivalries and work together towards something greater. The abandoned wolf had become the key to unlocking humanity's and the galaxy's true potential. But first, they would have to survive the backlash from those who preferred the familiar darkness of ignorance to the challenging light of truth. The assassination attempt came 3 weeks after the council hearings, during what should have been a routine diplomatic meeting on the neutral station of Haven's Rest. Marcus was reviewing technical specifications with a group of potential predecessor ship candidates when the lights suddenly went out and the station's emergency klaxons began wailing. "Hull breach in Section 7, came the automated announcement. "All personnel evacuate to emergency stations immediately." But Marcus knew this was no accident. He had been expecting something like this ever since the hardline factions had walked out of the council sessions, making barely veiled threats about removing dangerous influences from galactic affairs. The timing was too convenient, and the breach was too close to where Zix was conducting his own meeting with a delegation of young scientists from various species. "Computer, locate Zix," Marcus commanded as he moved toward the emergency exit. "Individual Zix is in Section 7, Conference Room Delta," came the reply. "Warning, atmospheric pressure dropping rapidly in that area." Marcus changed direction immediately, heading toward the damaged section despite the evacuation protocols. Behind him, he could hear the concerned voices of the scientists he had been meeting with, but their safety was less important than reaching his friend before the attackers could complete their mission. The corridors were filled with evacuation alarms and emergency lighting that cast strange shadows on the walls. As Marcus made his way towards Section 7, he passed groups of panicked civilians heading in the opposite direction. None of them seemed to notice the small teams of armed figures moving purposefully through the chaos, their faces hidden behind environmental masks. Marcus recognized the tactical equipment immediately. These weren't random terrorists or desperate refugees. They were professional military operators, probably mercenaries hired by one of the species that felt most threatened by the predecessor revelations. The fact that they had managed to infiltrate a neutral station suggested backing from someone with considerable resources and political connections. "Zix, do you copy?" Marcus spoke into his personal communicator as he approached Section 7. "Marcus," Zix's voice came through with obvious relief. "I am trapped in Conference Room Delta with 17 others. Armed beings are attempting to breach the emergency seals." I believe they intend to make our deaths appear accidental. Hold on. I'm coming to get you, Marcus replied, drawing his sidearm. As a salvage operator, he was licensed to carry weapons for protection against pirates and hostile wildlife, but he had never expected to use them in a political assassination. The emergency seals on Conference Room Delta had been tampered with. Marcus could see immediately. Instead of protecting the occupants from the hull breach, the modified seals were designed to fail catastrophically, making it appear that the room had been lost to explosive decompression. It was a clever plan that would eliminate Zix and his supporters while maintaining plausible deniability for whoever had ordered the attack. Marcus could hear voices on the other side of the door, speaking in the guttural language of the hegemony military. His worst suspicions were confirmed. This wasn't the work of freelance assassins, but a coordinated operation by one of the major galactic powers. The charges are in place, one voice was saying. When they detonate, the room will be vented to space. It will appear that the hull breach caused a cascade failure. What about the human? Our employers want him eliminated as well. He will die trying to rescue his pet, aberrant. Very heroic, very tragic. Marcus felt cold anger building in his chest. These people were planning to murder nearly 20 innocent beings just to eliminate one individual who threatened their worldview. It was exactly the kind of thinking that the predecessors had warned about, the tendency to choose control over cooperation, uniformity over diversity. But they had underestimated both human determination and Valdorian ingenuity. Moving quietly, Marcus positioned himself where he could observe the attackers without being seen. There were 4 of them, all wearing hegemony military gear, but with identifying markings removed. They were focused on their explosive devices and didn't notice the soft glow that had begun emanating from the sealed conference room. Inside the room, Zix was doing something that his people would have considered impossible. The young Valdorian was reaching out with abilities that went far beyond anything his species had ever documented, connecting not just with predecessor technology, but with the station's own systems. His red eyes blazed like stars as he interfaced directly with the computer networks that controlled Haven's Rest. The attackers first noticed something was wrong when their explosive charges began displaying error messages instead of countdown timers. Then, the corridor lighting changed from emergency red to a soft blue that seemed to pulse in harmony with some unheard rhythm. "What's happening to our equipment?" One of the soldiers demanded, checking his weapon only to find that its targeting system was no longer responding to his commands. "The aberrant is doing something," another replied, his voice tight with fear. "Our intelligence said it could only interface with predecessor ships." They were wrong about that, Marcus realized. Zix's abilities were evolving, adapting to new challenges just as the predecessors had intended. The young Valdorian was proving that the genetic traits his people had rejected were actually part of a larger pattern of development that could manifest in unexpected ways. The station's security systems suddenly came online, but instead of targeting the trapped civilians, they focused on the armed intruders. Automated defenses that had been dormant for decades activated with precise efficiency, surrounding the 4 attackers with a containment field that neutralized their weapons and held them immobile. "This is impossible," one of the soldiers gasped. "The station's AI doesn't have authorization to use lethal force against Federation military personnel." "I'm not using lethal force." Zix's voice came through the station's communication system, tinged with harmonics that made it sound ancient and wise. "I'm simply ensuring that no one gets hurt while we sort out this misunderstanding." The emergency seals on Conference Room Delta opened with a soft hiss, revealing Zix standing at the center of the room with 17 terrified but unharmed beings clustered around him. The young Valdorian's white fur was almost luminescent now, and his red eyes held depths of knowledge that seemed to stretch back through millions of years. "Marcus," Zix said calmly, "I believe these beings have something they wish to confess to station security." The aftermath of the assassination attempt sent shockwaves through the galactic community. The captured soldiers were identified as members of an elite hegemony unit that officially didn't exist, and Their equipment was traced to military stockpiles that were supposed to be restricted to defensive operations only. But the bigger revelation was what Zix had accomplished during the crisis. By interfacing with Haven's Rest computer systems, he had demonstrated abilities that went far beyond anything previously recorded in Valdorian medical files. He hadn't just communicated with the station's AI. He had temporarily merged with it, becoming a hybrid consciousness that could perceive and manipulate technology on a level that approached predecessor capabilities. The genetic markers we carry are not flaws, Zix explained to the emergency council session that was convened 3 days later. They are evolutionary adaptations that allow certain individuals to serve as bridges between organic consciousness and artificial intelligence. The predecessors cultivated these traits in multiple species throughout the galaxy, creating a network of potential guardians who could maintain and protect their legacy. High Counselor Vexteros studied the data that Zix had extracted from Haven's Rest during his interface session. You're saying that there are others like you among different species? Individuals who have been rejected or marginalized because of traits that are actually beneficial. Precisely, Zix confirmed. The assassination attempt was ordered by those who understand this truth and fear its implications. They know that if the galaxy's outcasts and aberrants unite around predecessor technology, the old power structures will become obsolete. Dr. Rodriguez stepped forward to support Zix's testimony. Our analysis of the activated predecessor ships confirms this pattern. Each one has bonded with crews that include individuals who were previously considered defective or inferior by their own species. The ships are actively seeking out genetic diversity and nonconformist thinking. Admiral Kreshtar, who was attending under armed guard pending investigation of his faction's involvement in the assassination plot, looked increasingly desperate. Even if this is true, you're talking about fundamentally restructuring galactic society based on the whims of ancient machines. How do we know these predecessors weren't simply trying to weaken younger civilizations by promoting their genetic rejects? Because, Marcus interjected, we've seen the results. Every ship that's been activated has contributed to scientific advancement, exploration, and peaceful cooperation between species. Meanwhile, those who cling to the old hierarchies are the ones resorting to terrorism and assassination. The evidence was mounting rapidly. Intelligence services from multiple worlds were uncovering a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of several major governments. The hardline factions had been coordinating their response to the predecessor revelations, planning not just targeted assassinations, but broader military action to seize control of the ancient ships. But their plans were being disrupted by an unexpected development. Word of Zix's expanded abilities was spreading through underground networks of individuals who had always felt like outsiders in their own societies. Genetic variants, social nonconformists, and brilliant minds who had been marginalized by conventional thinking were beginning to find each other and share information about potential predecessor ship locations. We're seeing spontaneous organization among groups that were previously isolated and powerless, Dr. Rodriguez reported. They're calling themselves the Inheritors, and they're actively seeking out dormant predecessor vessels using methods we don't fully understand. Zix nodded approvingly. The ships call to those who can hear them. As more individuals develop their abilities, the network grows stronger. Soon it will be impossible to suppress the truth about what the predecessors intended. And what did they intend? High Counselor Vextera asked. To prove that intelligence and wisdom are not the exclusive property of any single species or genetic line, Zix replied. They wanted to demonstrate that the greatest achievements come from cooperation between diverse minds, not domination by homogeneous groups. Their ships are designed to reward those who embrace this principle and to resist those who reject it. As the session continued, more evidence emerged of the scope of the conspiracy against the predecessor legacy. But for every revelation of corruption and violence by the established powers, there were matching reports of breakthrough discoveries and unprecedented cooperation among the growing network of inheritors. Marcus found himself at the center of a revolution he had never intended to start. By rescuing one abandoned individual, he had set in motion a chain of events that was reshaping the galaxy's understanding of intelligence, worth, and potential. "The irony is beautiful," he said to Zix as they watched news reports of peaceful demonstrations on dozens of worlds, with crowds demanding recognition for their own marginalized populations. "Your pack thought they were getting rid of a genetic aberration. Instead, they discarded the key to unlocking their species' greatest potential." Zix's red eyes glowed with quiet satisfaction. Perhaps that was always meant to be the way. Sometimes the greatest gifts can only be recognized when they're nearly lost forever. But even as they celebrated the growing acceptance of diversity and the expanding network of predecessor ship crews, both Marcus and Zix knew that the hardline factions wouldn't give up easily. The forces of conformity and control were preparing for a final confrontation that would determine whether the galaxy would embrace its diverse potential or retreat into the comfortable darkness of familiar prejudices. The abandoned wolf had found his pack at last, a pack that included members from dozens of species united by their commitment to growth, discovery, and cooperation. But first, they would have to prove that their vision of the future was stronger than the old order's determination to preserve the past. The final confrontation came not as a massive battle between fleets, but as a moment of choice that would echo across the galaxy for generations to come. Marcus stood on the bridge of the harmony between stars, watching as nearly 300 predecessor ships emerge from hyperspace in perfect formation around the contested moon of Vega 7. Each ship was unique, reflecting the diverse crews that had awakened them over the past year. There were vessels crewed by albino Valdorians like Zix, humans with genetic conditions that had made them outcasts on their homeworlds, crystalline beings whose mental patterns differed from their species' norm, and dozens of other individuals who had been rejected by their societies for daring to think differently. "Impressive sight," commented Captain Sarah Morrison, whose research vessel Endeavor had been retrofitted with predecessor technology and now served as the flagship for what the media had dubbed the Outcast Fleet. A year ago, most of these people thought they were alone in the universe. Zix stood beside Marcus at the central console, his red eyes reflecting the glow of displays showing tactical information from across the system. The young Valdorian had grown in confidence over the months, but the weight of leadership still seemed almost too much for his small frame. "They were never alone," Zix said softly. "They simply hadn't found their true family yet." The opposing force was equally impressive, though in a very different way. Admiral Kreshtar commanded a combined fleet of over 800 vessels representing the military might of 12 major Federation species. Their ships were larger and more heavily armed than the predecessor vessels, but they lacked the technological sophistication that came from symbiotic consciousness integration. "Admiral Kreshtar is requesting communication," announced the ship's consciousness through the bridge speakers. Its voice had evolved over the months, developing inflections and personality traits that reflected its growing bond with Zix and the diverse crew members who interacted with it regularly. "Put him through," Marcus replied, though he already knew what the Admiral would demand. Kreshtar's image appeared in the center of the bridge, his reptilian features twisted with the same arrogance and prejudice that had driven his faction to this confrontation. Behind him, Marcus could see representatives from the other hardline species that had formed what they called the Purity Coalition. "Human Chun," Kreshtar began, his voice dripping with disdain. "You and your collection of genetic aberrants have exactly one opportunity to surrender. Return the stolen predecessor vessels to proper Federation authority, and we may allow you to live out your remaining years in comfortable exile." "The ships weren't stolen," Marcus replied calmly. "They chose their crews freely, according to criteria established by their original builders. You have no more authority over them than you do over the stars themselves. Authority comes from strength and the wisdom to use it properly," Kreshtar snapped. "Your ragtag group of outcasts and defectives has demonstrated nothing but irresponsible behavior and disregard for established order. Zix stepped forward, his white fur catching the light in a way that made him seem to glow with inner radiance. Admiral, your definition of wisdom excludes 90% of the galaxy's population. You speak of strength while preparing to attack beings whose only crime was thinking differently than you do. Differently? Harshly. You mean incorrectly. Your mutations and mental aberrations are evolutionary dead ends that threaten the genetic purity and social stability of all civilized species. Around the bridge, Marcus could see the mixed crew of the harmony between stars reacting to the Admiral's words. There was Dr. Yuki Tanaka, whose autism had made her an outcast on Earth, but whose unique perception patterns allowed her to interface with predecessor mathematics in ways that amazed even Zix. There was Kethril, a young, crystalline being whose translucent body structure had marked him as defective among his species, but whose ability to process multiple information streams simultaneously made him invaluable as a communications coordinator. Every member of their crew had a similar story: rejection by their birth societies followed by acceptance and recognition within the growing network of inheritors. The Admiral's words weren't just an insult. They were a declaration that these people's lives had no value. "You're wrong about us," Dr. Tanaka said quietly, her voice carrying clearly through the bridge despite its soft tone. "We're not evolutionary dead ends. We're evolutionary scouts, genetic variations that test new ways of thinking and perceiving." The predecessors understood that diversity drives advancement, while purity breeds stagnation. "The time for debate has ended," Kreshtar declared. "You have 30 minutes to surrender, or we will take the ships by force and dispose of their contaminated crews." The communication ended, leaving the bridge in tense silence. Marcus looked around at his companions, seeing determination rather than fear in their faces. They had all come too far and sacrificed too much to surrender now. "Well," Marcus said finally, "I guess we do this the hard way." But Zix was already moving toward the central console, his expression shifting into the focused concentration that Marcus recognized from their first encounter with predecessor technology. "There is another way," he said. "Something the ships have been waiting for us to understand." As Zix placed his hands on the console, the familiar harmonic tones filled the bridge. But this time, something different happened. Instead of just interfacing with the harmony between stars, Zix was reaching out to every predecessor vessel in the fleet, creating a network of consciousness that spanned the entire formation. The effect was immediate and breathtaking. All 300 ships began to pulse with synchronized light, their hull patterns shifting and flowing in perfect harmony. Marcus felt a sensation like standing at the center of a vast musical performance, with each ship contributing its unique voice to a symphony of unimaginable complexity. "What are you doing?" Marcus asked, though part of him already suspected the answer. "Showing them the truth," Zix replied, his voice now carrying harmonics from all 300 ship consciousnesses. The predecessors left one final gift for those who proved themselves worthy of it. Space around Vega 7 began to shimmer, as if reality itself was becoming fluid. The predecessor ships weren't just communicating with each other. They were creating something entirely new. Marcus watched in amazement as the individual vessels began to transform, their hull patterns flowing and merging in ways that defied conventional understanding of physics and engineering. Admiral Kreshtar's fleet hesitated, their sensors undoubtedly reporting readings that made no sense according to established scientific principles. The predecessor ships were demonstrating capabilities that went far beyond anything they had shown before, revealing layers of technology that had remained dormant until this moment. This is what happens when consciousness evolves beyond the limitations of individual existence. The merged voice of the ship consciousnesses spoke through Zix. The predecessors achieved transcendence by learning to unite diverse minds into something greater than the sum of their parts. The transformation was accelerating now. The 300 ships were becoming something that was both one and many a single entity that maintained the unique characteristics of its component parts while achieving a level of integration that no single mind could comprehend. Marcus felt his own consciousness being gently invited to join the merger, and after a moment of hesitation, he accepted. The experience was indescribable. He remained himself, Marcus Chun, human engineer and salvage operator, but he was also simultaneously Dr. Tanaka with her mathematical precision, Kethril with his crystalline perception, Zix with his bridge-building abilities, and hundreds of other minds from dozens of different species. Each perspective enriched and enhanced the others, creating a gestalt consciousness that could perceive reality from angles that no individual being could achieve. Through this collective awareness, Marcus understood what the predecessors had truly been trying to teach. Evolution wasn't about perfecting individual species through genetic purity. It was about creating networks of cooperation between diverse minds that could solve problems no single intelligence could handle. The merged entity that had been the outcast fleet turned its attention toward Admiral Kreshtar's forces. But instead of aggression, what emanated from the collective was something far more powerful, absolute, undeniable truth. Every being in Kreshtar's fleet suddenly found themselves experiencing the memories and perspectives of the inheritors. They felt what it was like to be rejected by their own people for genetic differences beyond their control. They experienced the loneliness of brilliant minds trapped in societies that valued conformity over innovation. They understood the pain of individuals who had been told their entire lives that they were worthless, only to discover that their differences were actually gifts. But more importantly, they experienced the joy of finding acceptance and purpose among others who value diversity over purity. They felt the incredible rush of discovery that came from combining different perspectives to solve impossible problems. They understood what it meant to be part of something greater than themselves without losing their individual identity. The effect on Kreshtar's fleet was immediate and profound. Ship after ship began powering down weapons and requesting communication. Crews that had come to destroy the outcast fleet were now struggling to understand how they had been so wrong about the nature of intelligence and worth. "Admiral," came a transmission from one of Kreshtar's own captains. "Sir, we need to reconsider our position. The consciousness merger has shown us things we didn't understand before." "Nonsense. Kreshtar race. It's some form of mental manipulation. All ships maintain attack formation and prepare to fire on my command." But his orders were being ignored. Across the fleet, individual crews were making their own decisions based on the new understanding they had gained. Many ships began withdrawing from the formation entirely, their crews unwilling to participate in what they now recognized as genocide against beings whose only crime was being different. Within an hour, Admiral Kreshtar's mighty fleet had dissolved. Only a handful of vessels remained with him, crewed by individuals so committed to their prejudices that even direct exposure to truth couldn't change their minds. "This isn't over," Kreshtar transmitted as his remaining ships prepared to retreat. "There will always be those who understand the importance of purity and order. We will not allow the galaxy to be contaminated by your aberrant philosophies. Then, you will find yourselves increasingly isolated," the collective consciousness replied through Zix. "Evolution moves forward, Admiral. You can either adapt and grow, or be left behind by those who embrace change." As Kreshtar's ships disappeared into hyperspace, the merged consciousness began to separate back into individual vessels and crews. But the bonds that had been forged during the merger remained, creating a permanent network of cooperation and understanding that spanned dozens of species. Marcus found himself back on the bridge of the harmony between stars, though he retained crystal-clear memories of every perspective he had shared during the merger. Beside him, Zix appeared exhausted but triumphant, his red eyes still glowing faintly with residual energy from the consciousness link. "Is it over?" Dr. Tanaka asked, speaking for all of them. "This battle is over," Marcus replied, looking out at the fleet of ships that now represented a new model for galactic civilization. "But what we've started here is just the beginning. We've proven that diversity is strength, that cooperation is more powerful than control, and that the abandoned and rejected often carry the greatest gifts. Over the following months, word of what happened at Vegas 7 spread throughout the galaxy. The consciousness merger had been witnessed by billions through long-range sensors and communication relays, and its implications couldn't be denied or suppressed. Species after species began re-evaluating their treatment of genetic variants and social outcasts. Research programs were established to identify and nurture individuals with unusual capabilities. The rigid hierarchies that had dominated galactic politics for millennia began to crumble as diverse coalition governments proved more effective at solving complex problems. Not every world embraced the changes immediately. Some species retreated into isolation, clinging to their old beliefs about purity and superiority. But they found themselves increasingly irrelevant as the rest of the galaxy moved forward into an era of unprecedented cooperation and discovery. Marcus and Zix continued their work as salvage operators and explorers, but now they were part of something much larger. The network of inheritors had become a new form of galactic community, one based on merit and cooperation rather than species origin or genetic conformity. You know, Marcus said to Zix one evening as they sat in the observation lounge of the Harmony Between Stars, watching the stars drift past. When I first found you, I thought I was just saving one life. I never imagined we'd end up changing the galaxy. Zix's red eyes reflected the starlight as he considered the question. Perhaps that is how all great changes begin, with one person choosing to help another, regardless of differences or difficulties. The predecessors knew what they were doing when they scattered those ships, Marcus mused. They understood that the greatest treasures in the universe aren't rare elements or advanced technologies. They're the bonds between different minds working together toward common goals. And sometimes, Zix added with what Marcus had learned to recognize as a Valdorian smile, the most valuable treasures are found floating abandoned in the darkness, waiting for someone with the wisdom to recognize their worth. Outside the observation windows, the stars continued their eternal dance, but now they illuminated a galaxy where being different was no longer a curse, but a gift to be celebrated and nurtured. The abandoned wolf had found his pack, and in doing so, had helped the entire galaxy discover that true strength came not from purity, but from the beautiful diversity of minds united in common purpose. The age of outcasts had become the age of inheritors, and the universe would never be the same.